Well, good evening. Welcome to Yada Yahowah Radio. I'm here with Kirk and Dee. And this evening, as I understand it, Kirk, you've done some research. You've listened to and studied a comprehensive review of the state of the world from one of the premier think tanks. And what you have heard, as I understand it, is quite consistent with what we've been presenting on Yada Yahowah Radio in terms of where the world is headed and what it means for Jews, both in Israel and the United States, as well as what it means for Europe, the United States, China, and Russia, and how many of these key players are moving the world towards economic collapse, towards worldwide famine, and most importantly and negatively, directly towards nuclear war. And we've been quite detailed in explaining exactly how this is happening, who the players are, why it's happening, and when it's going to come to fruition. And it sounds like quite recently, one of the leading think tanks in the world has come to the same conclusion.
Yes, sir.
So go ahead, Kirk. The mic is yours, as they say.
Okay. Well, the hardest thing to grasp, I think, for most Americans is that they are patriotic, they're religious, they're political, and extraordinarily arrogant, which Yahweh talks about, and they spit on Israel to make things even worse. They try to move everyone around, and now they're poking the Russian bear. And they think they can control China, and we're just delusional. Was my view after I read all these reports, and I tried to read as many of the footnotes as well, and on and on and on and on. But here's what it said. The first issue they addressed was the new alignment of the world, which is the largest world economies in GDP and purchasing power. They made a list there, which was I started to ignore, and then I looked at it a little deeper, and I thought, well, boy, that's kind of interesting. They've got China, and these are percentages of gross national product and so forth. And China, of course, is the leader at 30-something%. The U.S. is 25, 35, and don't get lost in the details here. Just follow with me a minute. India, 11.75%, and then it moves down to single digits when you have Japan at 6.11 and Germany at 5.25. Russia is only 4.37. Indonesia is 4, and UK and so forth, and Brazil and France are tiny players as well. But what was interesting, what I did is I aligned the ones that have been joining together, that is China and India, Indonesia, and India, did I say India?
Yeah.
And that comes out to about 54%.
And of course, Russia, and to a large degree now Brazil, that's the BRIC initiative, is joining them.
Yes. So all of those, I put the BRICS together, and that comes up to about 54% of the economic power of the world. And then that leaves the other side of the shore, France and England, Germany and Japan with the U.S. at about 44%. But here's what's really interesting. Japan is already leaning towards China. They're making all kind of deals with China because they can see that nobody's going to defend them. Germany has made all kind of overtures trying to get out of this deal. They are not high on invading Russia. They don't want to give tanks away, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the UK will stay with America, and France, who knows. But that comes up to around 76% of the economic power of the world against the people you're trying to fight all the time. And we don't make anything, and we don't, so we're in trouble.
Yeah, we're pretty good at making weapons, but even then, we need to buy all of the raw material from Russia and China, which puts us in a very difficult spot. And I'm not sure even now we are the leader in the most effective weapons. If superpowers go to war, you can trust me on this. It will not be through battle groups and aircraft carriers, which the United States is dominant. It's not going to be through strategic bombers. It's going to be through hypersonic missiles, whether they're shot from submarines or from silos. But those carrying nuclear warheads are going to be the unstoppable foe of war between superpowers, and we are not on the cutting edge of that. Not that I would encourage anyone to be, but the countries that we are antagonizing are, and they have put their submarines off the U.S. coast. Matter of fact, Russia recently, just this week, said that continuing to escalate the Ukrainian war by sending in battle tanks and long-range missiles, which is what the United States has done recently. What Russia has responded is that, of course, you're setting us up to have only one option, and the first to feel that option will be London, because they have been an antagonist all along. And then we will pick 2 U.S. cities, and the U.S. can figure out which ones they will be. And they're not talking about sending in a tank. They're talking about a nuclear weapon. And this is a devastating consequence. And I've been trying to talk America down off of this ledge for over a decade, and we go further and further out on it. Yeah, we go further and further out on it. Yeah, it's interesting to look at the formation of BRIC, and I'm convinced that BRIC is going to be the economic fate of the world and the demise of America's status as the lone reserve currency. And when we lose that status as the reserve currency, our fiat money, which is really a liability, not an asset. Just look at one of your bills. It's a promissory note. You recognize that it has no value. We will not be able to fund our debt, even with the illusion of quantitative easing, which is just simply sleight of hand. The world will not need to keep U.S. dollars in reserve to buy petrol and other goods and services. They'll be able to use any one of a dozen different currencies. And so the world will be awash in dollars. We won't be able to continue to fund our debt. Inflation will become far worse than it is now. It'll become much higher double digits. And the United States economy is going to collapse. It is inevitable. There is no remedy for it at this point. We're far too far off that cliff in the death spiral, and having destroyed the value of our currency, clearly the things that exacerbated it the most was the idiotic response to COVID, where we shut down the economy and then flooded the economy with funny money to try to get it jump-started. That was the single worst thing. And then second only to that was when we imposed sanctions on Russia for a war that we egged them into and gave them no choice, and paralyzed world economies trying to emerge from the consequence of COVID. That 1-2 punch absolutely devastated the world. And then there is a third aspect to it, and there are 3 arms to this, and they all point in the same direction, and that is the United States has been belligerent. We have demanded that countries provide arms to the Ukraine. We have demanded that they have sanctioned Russia. We have demanded that they follow everything that we tell them to do, and quite frankly, the Europeans in particular are tired of freezing to death and starving. This has been disastrous for them, and they recognize that, particularly in what the United States did in Afghanistan, that we can't be trusted. Mm-hmm. So the combination of the fact that the United States is the biggest hypocrites in the world, and literally, I mean, we blame everyone for the things that we do the most of, and then we badger countries to do what we dictate. They're tired of it. And so BRIC was created to do away with the dependence on the U.S. dollar so that no one in the world would have to be badgered by the U.S. And the moment Saudi Arabia accepts any one of the BRIC currencies, it's over. Within a week, we'll have economic collapse. And Saudi Arabia's largest customer is not the United States. It's China. And China is very close to having a pipeline that will run all the way from Saudi Arabia into China. That runs now almost all the way from the Caspian Sea. I think it's nearly finished. From the Caspian Sea and Iran, which is why they back Iran, all the way into China. And there's not much that needs to be done to tie Saudi Arabia into it. It's over the moment that occurs. And it's, I think it's inevitable. And as you say, the countries that are part of it are Brazil, which is the largest economy in South America, India, which is the world's second
largest population in the world now.
Yeah, now I think it actually passed China, so it's the largest population in the world. Russia, which, by the way, is not losing the war in the Ukraine, even though we are
we'll cover that in a minute.
Sending stunning amounts of weapons there. And China, that's what BRIC stands for. And China's investments now throughout Africa, their investments throughout the Middle East, even Israel, that's their second largest trading partner is China. They are so invested in Africa, the Middle East, and in all these nations now, Central America, that are floundering because of the 1-2 punch of COVID and Russian sanctions. That economically they have the world in a noose. And they're going to prevail. They're not going to allow the U.S. dollar to continue to control them. Now, I think the only reason that we're still playing the game is that the United States is their biggest market. They are other than the funny money held by the Federal Reserve and quantitative easing, they're the largest holder of U.S. Treasuries, which they have not increased in a decade, while our debt has quadrupled. But they don't want to lose the value of that, and they don't want to lose the U.S. as a market immediately. So they will continue to invest in that Beltway, that initiative, and soon they just flat out won't need us. And when they don't need us, it's over for us. We put ourselves in a horrible position.
Yeah. Well, there are two more parts, if you'll allow me to cover.
Sure,
one of them is the big lie about the Ukraine. And first of all, the big lie is Russia is not losing this war. The death toll is the highest death toll to the Russians they reported could be as much as 20,000. However, Ukrainians are losing 8 for every 1 Russian that passed away, that died or was killed. Here's some little factoids that help you make up your mind about how well they're doing. Ukraine started with 2,000 tanks. They just about don't have any now. That's why they're so desperate to get some tanks from Russia. I mean, from Germany and some of the NATO.
The United States did promise them a boatload of A-1 Abrams.
By the way, the U.S. also has been begging places like, they mentioned that places like South Korea, if you have some weapons, please send them.
Yep. Yeah, matter of fact, Israel had weapons under U.S. custody someplace in the world. I don't even know where they were. And the United States, even though Israel is trying to stay neutral, shipped them to the Ukraine. Yeah, we are really dastardly at home.
We are really screwed. Yeah. Well, in any case, here's the situation. You know, they analyzed what NATO had, and NATO, they said, cannot put together more than 100,000 troops And then even if they could get them there, which would take a minimum of 2 weeks to a month to get there, they can't move them around the Ukraine because all the railroads and all the infrastructure has been bombed out by the war. So now they've amassed 650,000 Russian troops, which is they're calling an occupational force because they can pretty well take them when they want to, is the implications of what I was reading and agreed on by the think tank people. The U.S., they said, is really, really out of conventional weapons. Give you an example, so is most of European NATO nations. France has 72 howitzers at the present time. Russia uses about 70 of them a week. They're loaded with weapons. Majority of Russians, they said, from a standpoint of backing, the vast majority of Russians won't take off the gloves and speed up this war.
And I think it's important, Kirk, just to say that while we are presenting a scenario that is very different than what America has been led to believe, we are not advocating on behalf of Russia.
No,
what we want to do, we've been committed to only one thing since the beginning. We want all who are willing to listen to know the truth. And we want we want all who are willing to listen to be prepared for what's going to happen. And to tell you the truth and for you to be prepared for what's going to happen, you are going to have to hear rhetoric and evidence that is exceedingly caustic to American propaganda. And you will find that America isn't the good guy. We aren't the peaceful nation out there. We aren't the nation investing to make the world a better place. We are the merchants of death. We are belligerent. We are the least honorable country on earth in terms of our dealings with other nations and the way that we present ourselves and then corrupt the flow of information. We are better now at disinformation than was the propaganda that came out of Nazi Germany. And no nation on earth makes anywhere near as many weapons, supplies as many weapons to the world, or has invested anywhere close to the amount of money in their military and spine apparatus. As a matter of fact, you combine our spine and military, we outpace the rest of the world combined. But it does not put us in a position where we will prevail. We're going to lose. And part of this is just the stupidity of American maneuvering. We have invested in the wrong things. You know, we spend a fortune on our Navy, and it isn't worth anything. Not anymore.
You said that for 10 years that I'm aware of.
It is, it is so vulnerable now to these hypersonic weapons and to all manner of high-speed torpedoes that don't hit the vessel. They explode underneath it and break the keel. And our aircraft carriers and the support groups are going to be nothing but coffins. Mm-hmm. Our airplanes don't have enough range from them to engage a formidable foe. We are not who we think we are. And we are the reason that the war in the Ukraine has occurred. We encouraged it. We plotted for it. We've equipped it. We overthrew the elected government to make it possible. We're financing it. We're the cheerleader for it. And we've put ourselves in a position where only one or two scenarios is now possible. Russia wins the war on conventional grounds and takes the Ukraine, but won't stop there because of what Europe has done. Mm-hmm. And we have a European war. That's the best scenario that exists.
Yeah.
If Russia loses the war and we continue to supply enough weapons that enough Russians die that they decide that it isn't worth fighting anymore, then they're going to retaliate against the West that supplied those weapons that killed Russians with a nuclear attack. Those are the only two options. There are no others. So be prepared. And it's exceedingly important, not for us just to talk about the war, but also to talk about economic consequences. And we have destroyed the value of our currency. It only functions now as a matter of faith because of our international reserve currency status, which means that petrodollars, for example, and most other goods and services are traded internationally in dollars, which requires countries to have a stash of dollars to conduct trade. But BRIC was established explicitly to counter that. And the BRIC nations are far more economically powerful now than is America. And they're just bidding their time, particularly because of this Belt Initiative of China, where it's not just the roads that make it possible for China to access all of Europe, all of the Middle East, and all of Africa by rail and road, not even needing to go to sea, but put them in the position where they are the largest investor now in the world, by far. And they don't invest like you would do a business deal where if the business defaults you, where you say, boy, I'm sorry, and you go on your way. No, they do their deals directly with the government, and if there's any default, they own you. And this battle has been fought and lost. Now, the timing of it is also interesting because Yahowah returns with Dode in just over 10 years. 10 years and about, 7-8 months at this point. And there will be a world war between now and then. And that world war is going to start after the collapse of the Syrian regime, which is, in tatters. He's got Russia on one side, the United States on the other. You have Shia Islam on one side, Sunni Islam on the other. And it's a disaster. It's going to fall. Damascus will fall. It will be the final catalyst for that war. And to appease the Muslims, the United States will force Israel to accept the two-state final solution, which will lead immediately to world war, just as Neville Chamberlain's sacrifice of Czechoslovakia led to World War II. It is inevitable. In fact, Yahowah has stated it unequivocally. And as a result of that, we're going to find ourselves in a war that's going to have the United States and Europe on one side, China, Russia on the other side, Sunni and Shia Islam split. And people around the world are going to die. They're going to starve.
Millions.
There'll be pandemics. There'll be nuclear holocausts. That is where we're headed. And in the midst of all that, there will be total and complete economic collapse. Now, Kirk, if we were to say this 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it wouldn't have seemed possible. The normalcy complex is so pervasive in human thinking, which is that, yesterday was all right. Tomorrow will be the same.
Yeah.
Because they cannot fathom a radical change from what they have experienced. But COVID radically changed that. No one could have imagined the entire world giving up their livelihoods and liberty, and the ransacking of the economy for a virus that turned out to be about as deadly as the flu. No one could have imagined it. And yet here we are. And no one could have imagined that the United States would deliberately plot a proxy war with Russia that will lead to nuclear holocaust and economic meltdown. No one was then predicting the great reset that is going to be necessary after the success of brick. But it's all here now. We're dealing with that reality now. It's inevitable. And so now when we tell you what's going to happen, it may seem shocking, but it shouldn't anymore. And
doesn't to me.
It's not like, Kirk, we have been saying this for a year or two, or came to understand it post-COVID or post-American sanctions and proxy war with Russia, or post the formation of BRIC. We've been saying this for 20 years. The story hasn't changed, even to the details, over 20 years. No, we have an advantage. I would think that you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that understands the prophets better than we do. They're legitimate prophets. Hosea, who we're studying here, Yahowah, my favorite.
The real deal.
Yirmiah, Zechariah, Malachi. Perhaps the greatest of them, certainly the greatest of them in terms of overall impact on the lives of God's people, Moshe. My personal favorite is Yahowah, but the greatest man who ever lived was also a prophet. His name is Dod, mistakenly called David. By reading what they wrote and putting all the pieces together, we have seen the future presented to us in black and white. So we know what's going to happen. And we have another advantage, and so I want you to take heed when you hear this. I'm in a very unique situation. No one in the world, not in 2,500 years, has been in this situation. For reasons that are important to him and to no one else, Yahowah, which is God's one and only name, asked me to do this for you. Get paid for it. It was a volunteer job. I had no qualifications. And if you look at the people God likes to work with, it's definitely not bragging. The titles for this job are not prestigious.
Talk about that a lot. Yeah.
They are not prestigious. I am not a prophet. I am not the Messiah. I know who is. That's Dod.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But Yahowah asked for someone to awaken his people prior to his return. A Bashar, a herald, a choder, who is a sucker that's growing up from the original root stock and stump that has been cut down. Nakri, which is an observant foreigner. A Malach, which is a messenger. A Zeroah, who is one who plants the seeds that take root and grow. And Yada, which means one who finally comes to know and acknowledge what Yahowah had to say. And he specifically tells us in Yahowah, in the 11th chapter, that there are 7 spirits that are devoted to helping him understand what people have missed these last 2,500 years, maybe even 3,000 years. So you're listening to something here, and if you go to yadayah.com, YADAYAH.com, you'll have the opportunity to read, now as I think 26 or 27 volumes.
27, I think.
Yeah, and that doesn't even include the 3 that one was written on economics, business, called In the Company, about corporate dynamics, which is an exceedingly important read in today's world. And 2 were written on my expose on Islam. So I think it's 30, including those. They're all free. You can read every page and every word, online for free. Go to yadayah.com. And if you want a paperback or hardback, you can buy them all at Amazon for just the cost of printing and shipping, no royalty to us. So it's all there for you to read, to study, to learn. You can do what you can't do very easily with the spoken word or with the videos that permeate the world now. Because with the written word, particularly when you're reading it online, you can copy and paste to your heart's content and drop it into your favorite search engine, which is Google for most people, and look up that word's meaning as we translate Yahowah's testimony in any lexicon or dictionary of your choice. And we've given you that opportunity to validate what we have learned. And we've presented a commentary filled with insights. I'd say, Kirk, that there must be well over 1,000 insights that were first shared here in the Yada Yahowah series that was unknown to the world prior to this revelation. So this is an extraordinary time and an extraordinary opportunity. And if you're one of the people listening to this, then take advantage of it. Chances are, if you're listening to this, it's because Yahowah wants you to. Chances are, if you're listening to this, you're already questioning your religion, if you even are religious. You're also questioning your political affiliations if you had been or are political. Because if you're going to make this journey to where we are, which is to know Yahowah and to be part of his covenant family, you must forego your religion and your politics. We are not religious. We are not political. We are anti-religious, particularly Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And we are anti-political, particularly the largest government forms of politics, which would be communism, fascism, socialism. So that's where we are, Kirk. And I think you have even more that you wanted to share about.
Ken, if you want, it's really quite interesting.
Sure.
You talk about duplicitous people, and that's exactly what the Russians called them. You know, they had a chance, according to they had a chance to not prolong this war and get out of the deal, and they wouldn't do it. In fact, they laughed about it. They had a UN meeting or something. I didn't get the details. I'm sorry, I didn't write them down. But where they wanted to negotiate with the Russians, and what happened was that the Americans decided to just sandbag them and wait a while so they could rearm them, and then they rearmed them, and then they laughed about it in its own record, according to the Rand Corporation. So what Putin knows and the Russians said, well, we can't trust these people no matter what. Now the worm has turned.
Correct.
And so they said, why should you're not going to win this war? And for a whole host of reasons, you're not going to win this war. It's almost like reading the Civil War. Like the South's got nothing but cotton, and they're going to fight the industrial North. I mean, come on, you can't whip these people. So they have no reason to negotiate because they don't trust us. We always lie.
Well, they did everything they could to negotiate because Russia posted its troops around the Ukrainian border for 6 months? Mm-hmm. I mean, they did everything they could to get our attention because we were playing the Cuban Missile Crisis, but in a far more intense way. And so they recognized that if we were to include what were part of the old Soviet Union countries like the Ukraine into NATO and arm them, that Russia could not defend itself, that it would be over. And so no nation allows a country to threaten its demise. If you push a country into a corner, they will respond. So Russia did everything they could to tell the world, don't do this. Do not allow the Ukraine to be part of NATO, do not arm the Ukraine. It is like when the Russians put missiles in Cuba because they couldn't convince us to pull them out of Turkey, ours out of Turkey. And so the Cuban Missile Crisis was waged diplomatically for us to pull our missiles out of Turkey and for the Russians to pull their missiles out of Cuba so that we would de-escalate world conflict. And that's what Khrushchev and Kennedy did. They didn't like each other, but they recognized that backing down was the right call. But between George W. Bush, who is a raving lunatic and nincompoop, Obama, who was utterly unqualified for that position.
Yeah.
And then you follow that by, the likes of who we have seen. I mean, Trump. Oh my God.
It's crazy.
He can't even talk.
Rule by tweeting.
Yeah. And so collectively, they have pushed the buttons, and it's not just them. John McCain and Lindsey Graham were hugely involved in this, going to Ukraine and saying, we're going to make you part of NATO, and we're going to arm you to fight our mutual foe, and we will be with you every step of the way, and we will continue to arm and fight with you until you prevail. It was back in, 2013?
It had to be post
and
2009.
So that is what we have done. And then, easily the dumbest person to ever occupy the position of vice president, Kamala Harris, went to Europe, and I'm surprised she could even pronounce NATO, but she welcomed the Ukraine's participation in NATO, and 2 days later the Russians said the hell with it and crossed the border. That's what happened, folks. And, you can complain about Russia's takeover of Crimea. 95% of the Crimeans voted for them. Why? Because they had voted for a government that the United States overthrew.
Yeah, they forget that part.
Yeah.
They did show up to show up to show on
Russian. They are Russians. That revolution in Ukraine, that wasn't a haphazard event. The United States inspired it and armed it. And we did it because, and we talked about this when it was happening, because the Russians actually released the U.S. State Department and CIA cables to the revolutionaries, encouraging them, arming them. We did it because the Russians and the International Monetary Fund, for some stupid reason, were vying for who's going to fund the deficits in Ukraine, because the Ukraine is so inefficient, so filled with graft, that about 20-25% of the Ukrainian national budget is stolen. And so they're so graft-ridden, they can't prevail without handouts, and they never pay them back. But the Russians had a means to be able to recoup on their loans, which was the pipeline that fed fuel to Europe. And the United States had none. So the United States overthrew the popularly elected government so that the IMF, which is funded by the United States, could be the primary lender of the Ukraine and therefore control the Ukraine. That was our plan. And it was going to cost $3 to $5 billion a year to prop up the Ukraine. God, now we spend $3 to $5 billion a week sending them aid and weapons. And that doesn't even account for the country that's broken. I don't know where we are now, but somewhere north of 150 billion and racing towards 200 billion.
I've heard that number, yeah.
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 Why?
Well, yeah.
Because a bunch of
why?
Idiots decided that, we could bring Russia to its knees if we fought a proxy war through the Ukraine. No, we tried a proxy war with Russia in Vietnam. Didn't turn out very well for us. We tried another one in Afghanistan where, we clap our hands and say, look how well we did using the Taliban to bring down Russia's influence in Afghanistan. Yeah, it led right to 9/11 and the growth of Al-Qaeda.
Mm-hmm.
Turned out great for us. But we don't play this game very well. Now, we wouldn't care. I don't care between Russia and Australia and Germany and the UK and China. I don't care. Listen, I have some issues. I don't like the communist system in China. Big government is always bad government. I do not like the anti-Semitism in Germany. Yes, we do play some favorites, and we have some unfavorites. But the fact of the matter is, we're not trying to take sides here. I don't know what your arsenal is, Kirk, but mine's pretty meager. There is nothing we're going to do that is going to engage and change this one way or another. All we want to do is to give people information so that they are not hoodwinked, so they're not played for fools, so that they can make an informed and rational decision, and so that they can stop trusting their government, stop trusting their religion. And then once that happens, maybe they be open to what Yahowah has to say. And that is our ultimate mission, is that once people have walked away from religion and politics because they realize they can't trust them, that they're willing to listen to what Yahowah has to say and accept the terms and conditions of his covenant.
Yeah. So
what more did you learn, Kirk?
Well, one last thing I thought was interesting because you did several shows on it, and they went about thinking about what Russia has, all these resources, and what they need, and versus what they might want. However, their needs are nothing we have they need. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So they go on and make a long list, not too long, but for our show. But the first thing they pointed out that is Russia get stronger with the ruble, and they can buy things with the ruble without using the U.S. dollar. Then, of course, the question becomes, well, who needs the U.S. dollar? And we already discussed that ad nauseum. So when the West loses the war, they started out, there will be no petrodollar. And so this is a good focus. You've said the whole time, watch Ukraine. This is what's going to trigger so much, and just like we watch Syria, because we know what that's going to do, and so these are the key points.
We need to understand a couple more things about the Ukraine. In fact, three.
Sure.
First of all, from Yahowah's perspective, the Ukraine is among the worst nations on earth. Long before the Germans became anti-Semitic and united Europe in the Holocaust. And the Holocaust is a European affair, not just a German affair, not just a Nazi affair. It was a European affair. Europeans were anti-Semitic, and they were jubilant players in the Holocaust.
Oh, the pogroms? Yeah.
Yes, but the pogroms in the Ukraine were the worst in the world, and they began hundreds of years before the rise of Nazi Germany. There is no nation that per capita has done more to harass and kill Jews, to demonize Jews, than the Ukraine. So God does not care much for the Ukraine. Second, the birthplace of the most atrocious form of Judaism. The dominant form of Judaism in Israel, and the second largest form of Judaism in the United States, where some 45% of Jews live, is the Haredim. And ultra-Orthodox Judaism, Hasidic Judaism, was born in the Ukraine. It has the most idiotic founder of all time. The only founder of, well, I guess there's been others, but very few founders of, well, I guess Muhammad was illiterate too. But I don't know if he couldn't write, but he certainly didn't write. Baal Shem Tov, Lord of the Good Name, is attributed to creating it. He was just a blank slate that rabbis have written upon to create Hasidic Judaism. And it is repulsive. God despises it. And so you've got those two factors going against the Ukraine, and then the fact that graft in the Ukraine is worse than any country in Europe. Those three factors tell us that we should not be aiding and abetting the Ukrainians. Just shouldn't be doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And they should not have held that revolution. They should not have pleaded with the world for weapons. All they're doing is killing their own people, and we're aiding and abetting them. This is not a battle we should fight. And every once in a while, there's a Republican that comes up and says, we ought not be doing this. We ought to have an accounting of what's going on. We ought to try to salvage America before we go and try to destroy the Ukraine and Russia. But there's none of them with enough character and backbone, information, to stand up and do the right thing. So there we are, and it's a really ugly picture. I did want to talk about one item in the news, Kirk and Dee, before we move on. There is I think it's in Boston. There's the Satan Con. Have you heard about the Satan Con?
No.
I saw something on Twitter about
Satan
it.
Con. Yeah, Tucker actually took on a Satanist from the Satan Con. And a group of Christians, I think tens of thousands of them, have signed up to be prayer warriors against SatanCon 2023. It's going to be the largest satanic gathering in world history. Little do they know. So,
the Vatican?
They've got their little picture of Satan, and they have Satan as a goat, of course, and he's got his horns, but the body of a human. All gods are amorphosized. They have to have the body of a human. But of course, this one I think has the hooves. I don't see the bottom of the statue, but would have to have the hooves probably of the goat and the head of a goat. And there we are. Now, I am now just finishing the 35th chapter of Ezekiel, so I'm 70% through the book. And Ezekiel is, in essence, Satan's autobiography. Tells you play-by-play of who Satan is, what he wants to achieve, and how he is going about it. And the one thing that I learned more than that's pervasive, the single most important aspect of the three great fake religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, is that they all have their God attack Satan. And the book of Ezekiel is beloved by all three religions. And in it, the voice, who is the Lord of Babel, who claims to be Yahweh and is his antithesis, is constantly projecting on various people and places his satanic nature, which prior to his degradation by Yahweh after his little indiscretion in the Garden of Eden was glorious. And so he wants you to know how glorious he was. And he is now devoted to not only claiming that glory, but being perceived above Yahweh. He's been very effective at it. And so in the book of Ezekiel, there's this constant tug of war with Satan wanting you to know, I am really, really glorious, like the Ezekiel 1 and the sighting of his Lord above the skies of Babylon, that's Satan. And all of the projections, he will actually get into great detail as how he was one of the cherubs, protecting the walls of Eden, and which is why Towrah knew him. So he goes into great detail about who he was and what he's become and what he wants to achieve. And for Satan, which means the adversary, Ha-Satan means the adversary. So funny that the SatanCon, they use the term Satan without even understanding what the name means and where it came from. Ha-Satan means the adversary. Why would you worship the adversary, you idiot? Even Satan knows that title is a non-starter for him. He has to destroy any association with who he truly is, the Ha-Satan title. That's why you see in those three religions the constant attack on Satan, because Satan has to destroy any association with that title to be perceived as God. And that's the tug of war that exists all the way through the book of Ezekiel. I'm God, I'm Yahweh, I'm God, I'm Yahweh. You're going to know that I'm God, I'm Yahweh, repeated well over 100 times after he's done really heinous things. And it's all because he has to destroy this affinity with the Ha-Satan title. So these nincompoops at SatanCon that think that they're worshiping Satan, Satan despises them. He doesn't want to be known as Satan. He wants to be known as Yahweh. In fact, the 35th chapter, which I'm just finishing translating, is this attack on the birthplace of Islam. And the Lord of Babel ultimately turns on Muslims. And you say, why would he turn on Muslims? I mean, Allah is modeled after Satan. Why would you do that? You've got a religion that hates Jews as much as you do. He doesn't want to be known as Allah. Allah's not God. He knows Allah's not God. He doesn't want to be known as Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ isn't God. He sure as hell doesn't want to be known as the adversary, Ha-Satan. He wants to be known by the name of the only true God, Yahweh.
Right.
And so he will do everything in his power to destroy Islam in the end, because he wants to be known not as Allah, but as Yahweh. And he can't wipe out or have anybody wipe out God's chosen people, Jews and Israel, because the only place where he has any legitimacy to be seen as Yahweh is by Jews and Israel. So he even turns on Islam. So the whole story is just so fascinating. I figured that I'm about 750 pages into this. A lot of it is actually now presented at the Yada site. It's one of the wonderful things about having Jackie and her edit team editing as I write, and then having David post these edited chapters. So even before we've gone to print on the 2 volumes, actually be a 3-volume set on Babel, including Daniel, much of it is already available for you to read. But I did want to point out that Satan, the last thing Satan wants is to be known and worshipped as Satan, and the thing that he wants the most is to be perceived as God. And he has achieved his ambition because he is the Lord God of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Yeah.
All right. Unless somebody has something else they want to add, we are 2/3 through our program. I would like to cover a little Hosea. Are we at a place we can do that?
Can I interrupt? I want to interrupt one time, and then
okay,
I want you to look at when we started 5:1. Something kind of hit me about Shama, and I was thinking about it last night, and I'm looking at the letters and the pictographs.
Okay.
And the pictographs.
All right.
And I
All
said,
right.
okay,
So
Shama,
I'll read it to our listeners here, the translation of Hosea 5:1, and then you can share what you have found.
All right. Appreciate
it begins with hear this. Shama is the word zo'th defines this. Shama means to listen and to hear. That's all Shama means. Many English, I almost hate to call them translations, but because they're not even good paraphrases, change Shama to obey. There is nothing in Shama that suggests obedience. It means to listen. And that's because Yahweh expects the words that he spoke to his prophets to be recited. And when you listen to his words being recited, you can listen to them, even if you are the one who is reciting them to yourself. I can tell you, when I go through and I read through a chapter, I read it out loud. I want to hear the sounds. I want to retain it such that I read it out loud. So recite it. It says, hear this. Those who are priests and who have become leaders, HaKohen, the ministers, tasked with explaining and facilitating precipitation in the Bereth and Mikre through the Torah. Pay attention and be attentive to what you are hearing. Wakashab. Listen diligently and recognize this information is true. Then respond to it. Family of Yisrael. Israel means one of two things. It has a dark and a light meaning. The name is based on Sarah, the most, I think, certainly in the top 4 or 5 most interesting people in God's story. Certainly the most amazing woman in God's story. She would only be rivaled by the likes of Dod and Moshe, I think, in terms of being an extraordinary force for good. I think she's vastly more important than Abraham, but that's just my take on it. But it's her name that sits in the middle of Yisrael. And the name can mean to struggle and contend with God, or individuals who engage and endure with God. And I'll tell you that there's been a whole lot more Yisraelites who have been on the negative side of that interpretation. So, hear this, those who are priests and have become religious leaders. Pay attention and be attentive to what you are hearing, family of Yisrael. Household of the king and extended family of political leaders, open your ears to hear as tools to evaluate and consider. For this assessment applies to you. So, who is Yahweh speaking to?
Oh, he's priest.
Sure as heck is not a Gentile church, is it?
Israel.
No.
No. Certainly isn't the Haredim. He didn't use that term. Certainly isn't to Judaism. Most certainly isn't to Christians. Not to Muslims. Definitely not to Goyim. Hear this, those who are Cohen, the ministers. Pay attention and be attentive to what you are hearing, family of Yisrael. Household and extended family of political leaders, open your ears to hear and evaluate and consider. For this assessment applies to you. Indeed, you have become a snare. You are a dangerous means to control others. You are a mitzpah, the means to be observant, in addition to a net spread out upon Tabor, a broken and confused world. That's Hosea 5:1. Now, you said there was a word in there that you wanted to.
I did, and I've done it. I've done it a million times. Shama and Shamar are two of my favorite words, and some of the first that I've translated in the pictographs as well. And I'm looking at Shama, and I'm saying, I know that is always translated to hear and to listen with attention. which is a big deal for any father, who's saying, pay attention to me. Listen to me, son. Listen to me, daughter. This is, I'm trying to help you here. But the thing that struck me is I'm looking at it, and there's an A, and it's an A-ing, a picture of an eye at the end of it. And I'm saying, why isn't it an ear if there's listen? The thing that's important about what you do in the books that you've written, and the fact that we have the Dead Sea Scrolls and we work from the oldest documents and all, is so that it's a written word. All these books, I mean, I love to hear the show. I always did, but I used to read along, and I encourage everybody else to do that. Read along while you were talking, and I put my notes out to the side and all that sort of stuff long before I ever called you, and we got closer and did some shows together. The I is, I think, to emphasize, because you have the Shema, right, which is where the only difference is you have the Rosh at the end, or Resh at the end, and you can carefully examine and closely examine, carefully examine this thing. However, your I is the clue is to hear him, you have to read it, or somebody has to read it to you. So the I triggers there's got to be a visual written record somewhere that I can keep looking at. How do I closely examine and carefully consider anything that I can't get a hold of and repeat and repeat and repeat? Now, here I've got the internet, but
a great example of this
they didn't have that.
When Muhammad created the Quran, they were all recitals, and they maintained them orally from person to person for about 100 years before the first was written down. All oral. When something is oral and you pass it on mouth to ear, even at that moment, much is lost. Much is changed. If you play that game of where you do this, and you have even adults who are intelligent
the telephone game.
Sentences. The first person reads 3 sentences, and then from that point, it's all passed on one person to the next. And if you do that through a chain of 10 people, what you get back bears very little resemblance to what you began with. That's how the Quran was retained. You look at the Christian Jesus. You don't have a single thing he said written down within his lifetime, and he himself wrote nothing. That's why the Christian New Testament has more variations in it than it has words. In fact, about twice as many variations on the oldest manuscripts and the actual number of words in the text. It isn't even remotely reliable.
That's incredible.
You look at Rabbinic Judaism, and they claim that it's a lie, but they claim it's based upon an oral Torah. And that oral Torah was given at the same time the written Torah was given, even though there's no mention of the oral Torah in the written Torah, and even though the written Torah says, oh, this is the only revelation, they nonetheless believe that. So what do you think the chances are from 1500 approximately, 1450 BCE to 500 CE when the Babylonian Talmud is written down, which they claim is the repository of the oral Torah, that through that period of time, 2,000 years of oral transmission, that they would have gotten anything right? Zero.
Yep.
Now, the difference is when Yahweh spoke to his prophets, beginning with Moshe, the instruction was, write this down. The instruction was, get a really big scroll. Start writing this down. We're going to communicate in writing, because when you communicate in writing, and that's the advantage of the Yada Yahowah series versus this program, is you can read it at your pace. Someone can read it in London tonight, and someone can read it in Sydney, Australia tomorrow, or in Philadelphia the next day, and they're reading exactly the same text. And they can go back to it a week later or a month later, and there it is. And it doesn't change.
Right.
And with the written text, you have all the time in the world to make the connections, to think about it, and to thumb forward and back and connect it to other things that are written down. And when you write something down, as we have done 20 years ago, and it is still valid, that's an extraordinary accomplishment. And in Yahweh's case, he wrote things down 3,500 years ago. The written word is vastly superior to the spoken word. All the spoken word does that the written word will not do is you can convey more emotion through the spoken word. And so we can reach out to people who might not otherwise come to the Yada Yah site through social media and the spoken word. By the way, congratulations to you, Kirk. I understand now you are the new social media tycoon with your first advertising endeavor on Facebook. You have rung the bell and been a super champion. I also want to thank my favorite person in the world, my wife. She has done an amazing job recently of making the Yada Yah social media presence, which is managed by Dee, the very person who's talking to us on this program, and who does an astounding job of the social media outreach, which is all to draw attention to the books themselves. But my wife has put together a number of really elegant animations to help reach out to people and make them feel more comfortable at the site. So we have a lot going on right now, and Yahweh's message is getting more and more presentable and credible to people, and we're inviting you to read them. But that is an astounding thing. I've never thought about the fact that Shama, which means to listen, doesn't have a rosh in it. Shamar does, which means to be observant.
Yes.
So the one that tells you to be observant, which you would think would have the ain in it, which is the eye, and the one that tells you to listen doesn't have the ear but has the eye in it. So
but it's got to be.
It is saying if you want to listen to Yahweh, guess what you have to do?
You have to read. Open
you
your
got to
eyes.
use your eyes to read it.
Yeah.
And if you want to be observant, what do you have to do? You have to listen to it and process it through your brain. Pretty subtle, huh? Yeah, God doesn't make a trick. But he cheats because he created this alphabet in the first place to communicate all of these things. He cheats in a really wonderful way. I mean, he created this language of Hebrew. He created the alphabet in which it is written. He created the universe. So, his metaphors can walk on all fours. He does have a considerable advantage. But he has a sense of humor, and he is delighted when the likes of us, when you point out that it is really curious that to listen has an eye, and to be observant has an ear. But that is the way. That's the way it rolls. So here is Yahweh telling his people, "This applies to you, and you got a problem. You've become a snare. Judaism is a snare." I've talked about this before, and I don't think many people have an appreciation of it. And I am certain that there's a world out there that wants to label me an anti-Semite for saying this, when in fact I am the furthest from an anti-Semite on the planet, because Shem is the Hebrew word for name, and I don't think there is anyone on planet Earth in the past 2,500 years who has been as fond of, has been as willing to proclaim and say Yahweh's name and convey its implications as Shabbat. I love the name of his people, and Yahudim, which is the plural, Yahudah in singular, which means beloved of Yah. So we love the name. And I have devoted the last 22 years of my life, most days, 8 to 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, 6 and 7 days a week, to translating Yahweh's testimony from the oldest extant sources and then sharing those insights freely with God's people for the express purpose of having as many Israelites as is possible there on Yom Kippurim in year 6000 Yah, October 2nd at sundown 2033, recognizing Yahweh and calling him out by name as he returns with our Messiah, Dod, our King, and the Son of God, Dod, David. So that's why we do this. But here's the rub, folks. And Yahweh says this so many times that I can tell it to you confidently. The single greatest threat to Jews, the greatest hindrance to Jews, the past 2,000 years, has not been Nazis. Hasn't even been the Roman Catholic Church or Imperial Rome before it. It has not been the satanically driven Islamic jihadists. Not even progressives today. It's Judaism. Judaism is the single greatest hazard to God's people. It has been the force that has done the most to keep Jews from knowing Yahweh's name, to understanding the terms and conditions of his covenant, to actually attending his Moed Mikre as they were attended and capitalizing upon them. They treat the Torah as an object, and then they label their Babylonian Talmud Torah. They've turned everything Yahweh said into religious tyranny.
Drivel? Yeah, tyranny.
It's the greatest harm ever perpetrated on God's people. But it's not just Judaism. Judaism actually emerged simultaneously with Christianity. And it was this interplay between rabbis that created both religions to counter one another, both being wrong. One of the most acclaimed rabbinic students of the day was named Shaul. He became known by the Roman name that he chose as Paul. He wrote 14 of the books of the Christian New Testament, and he is responsible for inspiring 3 of the 4 Gospels, as well as the book of Acts is devoted to his life and was written by his publicist. He is the Christian New Testament, Paul. He claims to be the foremost student of Gamaliel, the foremost teacher of rabbis during the day. And he, as a rabbinical student, knew the Torah and prophets well enough to be able to misappropriate passages and to twist them, as Satan had done in the garden, for the express purpose of leading Gentiles away from the God of the Torah, Yahweh, the God of Israel. And so, had it not been for the teaching of rabbis, Paul would not have been equipped to create Christianity. They are to blame. But worse than that, the response to the stupidity of Paul, and Paul is the one who turned the Passover lamb into God. He's the one who robbed Dode of his title, Son of God and Messiah, and transferred those titles to a caricature known as Jesus Christ for the express purpose of creating a new religion. He went to war with the God whom he said inspired him. And all Jews had to do is to say, no, the Messiah is Dode. The very text that you're claiming are the basis of your religion say the opposite of what you're claiming. Dode is the Son of God. Read it. Dode is the Messiah. It's Dode who is coming back. God himself says so. And oh, by the way, God's name is Yahowah. And this person that the Romans crucified had Yahweh's soul because we were told he did. And he came to fulfill Passover. He is the Passover lamb. And with the fulfillment of Passover, and then with the removal of religious stigma on matzah, where the fungus of religion is removed from our souls so we are perfected, we are empowered to become the children of Almighty God on Bokurim. That's what happened. There could not have been a bodily resurrection because the Torah says the body of the Passover lamb is incinerated that night, plus it would be completely counterproductive.
Yeah.
It did not happen. It could not happen. He's not the Christ. He's not the Messiah. He's not the Son of God. There was no bodily resurrection. The Passover lamb never comes back to life. That's not its purpose. And so by corrupting the purpose of the Passover lamb, Paul destroyed any opportunity that anyone who would believe in the Christian religion would have of eternal life. And the rabbis, rather than point all this out and to say, this is what's written, you're lying, and we can prove it. I did. I wrote 4 volumes on it called Questioning Paul. Why didn't they? I compared what Paul said to what Yahowah said and crucified Paul. Destroyed 100% of his credibility. If I could do it, they could do it, but they didn't. And instead of using the truth to destroy this horrible lie perpetrated about Yosha as the Passover lamb. He was the Passover lamb, but him being the Messiah and Son of God, and then him coming back to life, and of matzah meaning nothing. What they did is they went to war against Yosha, condemned his name, blotted him out of the records, completely destroyed any chance of that Yehudim would have of knowing that Yahowah did as he promised in year 4000 Yah, and he fulfilled the promise of Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim, and Shabuah. So that everyone who would accept those promises and attend those days could become immortal, perfected, adopted into the covenant, enriched and empowered and enlightened by God. And by destroying the connection between Yahowah and what he did for his people, at that time, Rabbinic Judaism became the greatest force for evil the world has ever known. Worse even than Imperial Rome and the Roman Catholic Church. Worse even than Islam. Christianity exists because rabbis equipped the man who started it and then didn't know how to handle it. And lied on top of lies. That is not how you prevail. They lied against God rather than attacking the lie from Shaul Paul. You're responsible for what happened. Judaism is responsible. And the creation of Christianity led to the Roman Catholic Church and nearly 2,000 years of Jewish persecution, ultimately the Holocaust. It made the diaspora, the third actually invasion of Rome possible. And it doesn't end there. Muhammad was done. Living in Petra, which was due south of Jerusalem, he was finished. He had run out of material. He had confiscated and plagiarized all the Hanif poetry available. The Hanif poetry was Jewish poetry, actually. He had plagiarized all he could find. He ran out of material. And so he was run out of town following the satanic verses. We've talked about that on previous programs. I think last program we had quite an expose on the satanic verses and how that led to the Dome of the Hoopy print and the Wild Barak ride, which was from Petra to Jerusalem, into the non-existent temple at that time. What happened when he got to Yathrib is Yathrib was 3/4 Jewish. And he needed material to continue his ruse. So he paid rabbis to cite the fairly recently created Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud had been created within less than 100 years of that time. And they recited for money. Rabbis are great for doing things for money. Talmud stories to him, and he took those Talmud stories and twisted them for his own benefit. And then they mocked him for twisting them. And for mocking him after he paid for them, he turned on them and said the easiest way for me to destroy those who are trying to destroy my credibility is to kill them, which is what he did. Story ends. Without rabbis, there is no Islam. Without rabbis, there is no Christianity. Without rabbis, there is no Judaism. What a different place it would be. If that were the case, Yahweh wouldn't have had to turn to a goyim to tell the story. But that is the history. And for those who are clinging to any one of these religions, expecting a better result, shame on you. It hasn't changed. Not in 2,000 years. It's not going to change. So that's the nature of this particular passage. And even with the word that I transliterated, because it's the most difficult to just translate, which is mitzvah, it is a compound of my, which means to either consider the implications of or to question, sapat, which means being observant. So, indeed, you have become a snare, a dangerous means to control another, because you question what it means to be observant. And then you spread your net upon Tabor. Tabor is means to confound the earth. It's from Tabar, broken, and Tebel, which means a perverted and confounded world. This is what Yahweh says that his people have done. So, in this statement, Hosea 5:1, Yahweh's divided society, his society, the society that he cares most about, the Israelites, into three segments. There's the priests, who are ministers, the common people, and politicians. And I believe they're listed in this order for a reason. If the Loi, which has been converted to Levites, there is no B in the Hebrew language, and the Wah in Hebrew is pronounced as either an O or a U, so it is Loi, had listened and done as they were asked, Israelites would have heard them speak of Yahweh. Had that occurred, they would have responded appropriately because God's word is consistent, it's compelling, it's liberating, it's emancipating, it's enlightening. It's the most wonderful thing any of us have ever experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And had they done so, the people would have relied upon Yahweh's priests and judges to properly interpret and apply the Torah, which would have negated the need for kings. Yahweh didn't want kings. He was opposed to kings. Yes, you can say, all right, Yahweh picked Dod, and Dod's coming back as a king. What Yahweh has said is that if you're going to be dependent upon a ruler, and clearly I'm going to work through people, and if you're not going to listen to my Shaphat judges and my Cohen priests are going to act up and start lying to people, then at least I'm going to give you a king that has been a shepherd and a king whose attitude and aptitude are as similar to mine as I can find on the planet, which was Dod. So there would have been no need for kings had we just done what Yahweh was encouraging. Now, since he elected to use a different word for listen, for ministers, for individuals, and for leaders, three different words, let's see if we can ascertain why. For the priests, Yahweh chose Shama, the most common word in the Hebrew language for listen. When God wants to encourage us to listen to him, he uses Shama. It is not nuanced beyond hearing. And yet, because it is so often used in conjunction with Shamar to closely examine and carefully consider, and shares two of the three letters in its composition in common, we may include that the observant individual listens to God. Mm-hmm. The aforementioned letters comprising these words elucidate their similarities. They both begin with the sh shin, which is drawn as teeth. You say, teeth? What are we biting into here? Well, the teeth, if you were to start pronouncing words, what you would find is that vowels are open mouth sounds and consonants are closed mouth sounds, and you're constantly placing your tongue to the backside of your teeth to make these sounds. And so the teeth is symbolic of words. They're both followed by the mem. The mem is drawn as to show water. Water is the universal solvent, and it is the source of life. So that's why when we're looking for planets that might have life, the first thing we look for is water. If there's liquid water, there is the opportunity for life. If there is no liquid water, not so much. Those are the first two letters. The shin, as I say, was drawn to show teeth, used to depict the words we convey when we manipulate our tongues, and use them behind our lips and teeth to form sounds. And the mem is the picture of water, and thereby presents both the life-giving and cleansing nature of water. By the way, it's kind of interesting. The creation accounts talks about there being water very early on in the process, and now with the launch of the most recent space telescope, the Webb telescope, we're actually able now to look into these interstellar nurseries, and guess what we find? Just enormous amounts of water. So clearly, Yahweh knew what he was talking about. Water is not only created the nursery for stars, and we as humans are actually the result of stardust, particularly with carbon being the essence of our ability to be living creatures. So as a result, we are being asked to listen to and observe words which prepare us for life. That's what Shama would convey. Now, the concluding letter in Shamar is a rosh. It reveals the human head, a side view, which is right at the ear, which is what Kirk was suggesting, where we ingest the world that surrounds us using our eyes, our ears, our nose, and our mouth, and then we process it in our brain. That's what the rosh conveys. Shama, listen curiously by way of confirmation, ends, as you had said, with an A or an I. This is particularly relevant because it confirms something we've been sharing now for 22 years. Mm-hmm. We listen to Yahweh by reading the words he has inscribed on our behalf and reciting them. Don't hold the Torah up and dress it up like it's a whore and kiss it. Open it. Read it. This was the instruction given to the Kohen, to the individuals specifically tasked with conveying and interpreting the Word of God to the people so that they would understand the Torah, they would participate in the Bereth, and they would attend the Mikra. All teachers begin as students who listen before they speak. I don't know if there's much we could say that's more important than that. Mm. Teachers begin as students who listen before they speak. Members of the covenant family begin by listening to the Word of God before they try to speak to God. This idea of praying without ceasing, being a prayer warrior, yabbering to God when you don't even know His name, you haven't even bothered to read what He communicated through His Torah guidance, you're clueless as to what He communicated through His prophets, you've misinterpreted everything He said, and you want Him to listen to you. What are you, nut? What do you think you have to say that isn't going to irritate Him? Oh, God, I really want to know your will for my life. Then read the Torah, idiot.
Yeah, Shema Torah.
You want to know Yahweh's will for your life? Read the story of Dode.
Yeah.
That's His will for your life. My life. And every life. You don't like Dode because he's just too much of a lovable rogue, and read the story of Moshe. Extraordinary. But Yahweh wants. So God is telling us precisely what he wants, and what he wants is for us to listen to him before we start yabbering to him. I talk to God. I've had occasions here recently where I've been put in what I thought was a untenable position. I've been working at this job for 22 years, and here I start into the book of Daniel, and the first 6 chapters are sheer rubbish. And the beginning of the chapters that actually have some value are rubbish. The history is all convoluted. It's filled with religious and political statements. I mean, it's just wrong. And I said, wait a minute. So I'm talking to my wife, and I said, how am I supposed to deal with this? It's blatantly untrue. It's not that it fails the test of Dabarim 18 to prove who speaks for God and who doesn't, which says if you get anything in the past, present, or future wrong, or you say anything that's inconsistent with what Yahweh has conveyed, or you speak in the name of a God other than Yahweh, Jesus Christ, Hashem, Allah, that you're not only
Lord.
Lord, that you are not only a false prophet, but you're better off dead. It's not that he violated that. Everything he was saying was wrong. How do you deal with that? So I remember retiring one night after I was struggling with this, and sure enough, a voice welled up in me and said, I'm going to explain it to you. And after I explain this to you, you can go back and write. You're going to understand exactly what the book of Daniel represents. And I listened to that voice, and I wrote the book. It's now published. You can read it. It's I think it's currently presented as the 9th volume, the one following this, and the Yada Yahowah series, but it's being moved to the end of the bookshelf as part of the Babel series, of which there'll be 3 volumes initially. And it's written there for you to understand exactly what God shared with me. And then I start in the book of Ezekiel. So, well, we're still in Babylon, but thank God I'm out of Daniel. And it begins with a misstatement relative to the timing. It says, "This is when I'm the word of God came to me." And I said, "No, that can't be true." And so that's not a good start. And then it presents God as if he were Satan. I mean, he's got his fancy chariot wheels. He's got the all-seeing eye everywhere. He's got that are surrounding him, and these beasts have the faces of the principal signs of the zodiac that were so popular in Babylon. And of course, he is appearing above Babylon, which is exactly where Yahshua in the 14th chapter told us we would find him in his rise. And so you read through this, and it's a presentation of Satan pretending to be God. And then from there you have what is nothing but a bunch of tales of BDSM. I'm sure it was before the term was even invented, but of the Lord of Babel telling Ezekiel, who is his submissive, to do torturous things that are flat out embarrassing. And then it gets worse, because before long you find the Lord of Babel sexually abusing Jewish women.
Yep.
And then he pimps them out as if he is the pimp and they are his prostitutes. And then he turns on his prostitutes and dehumanizes them, and then has men who raped them kill the prostitute, as we would find he tells the Muslims to do in Islam. It's a horrible story. And through the first 25 chapters, he comes up with 25 different ways to kill Jews. He wants to boil them alive. He wants to slice them with his sword. He wants to plague them with his poisonous words. He has so many different ways to kill Jews. And so this is obviously not from God. It doesn't fail the Debatim 18 test, because the Debatim 18 test assumes that you're reading something that you might actually think could have come from God, and you're looking for, is it 100% accurate? Well, this is 100% inaccurate. You'd have to be a total nincompoop to think this came from God, and it dehumanizes Jews. It demonizes Jews. It's the most anti-Semitic book I've ever read, and I've studied Mein Kampf. I've studied the Quran. I've studied the Christian New Testament and written books on all of them. Ezekiel's the most anti-Semitic tome I've ever read. But it was Jewish religious leaders that put that piece of crap in the middle of legitimate prophets and brought this plague upon themselves. Now, I'm going to tell you, when you're committed, as I am to now, I've done this 22 years, I've written, as I say, 30 books now, done tens of thousands of radio programs that are archived around the world. And you're taking a prophet, or would-be prophet, who's beloved by 3 religions, and you're saying that that is the voice of Satan. I wouldn't tell you that takes some courage. Not many people are going to be that bold. And then when you're willing to say this is graphic and sexual and perverted and grotesque, and not pull any punches, well, that takes some courage too, because it's even hard on your own team to read that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the voice on Ezekiel was as clear as I'm talking to you tonight. In fact, clear. Do this for me. Do this for my people. This book has plagued them, has harassed them, dehumanized them for 2,500 years. Liberate women from its scourge. Liberate my people from its scourge. Demonstrate all the ways that it is wrong. Cover it all. And we are. So I'm telling you, Jews have been their own worst enemy. Putting this book in the middle of those prophets, it's exactly what God is talking about here. Why would you do that? Do you hate yourself so much that you would bring this kind of shame and disgrace upon yourselves? Now, the people of themselves, God selected Kashab. He wants those he is talking about to pay attention, which is what Kashab means, to be diligent regarding the response to what they're hearing. This is in our interest to be attentive, to receive the message, to accept it as true, so that we can respond appropriately to it. And let's be clear. Yahweh is addressing Yisrael, not Christians, not the Haredi. He is not interested in those who are religious even listening to him, because he can't stand to be around them. Yes, God is repulsed by the Haredi, by Christians, by Muslims, and indeed by progressives. The worst of the progressives that America was finally taken off the Foreign Affairs Committee. That was finally a good move. Yeah. Kashab was graphically, pastime. That is one of the worst human beings on the planet. Kashab was graphically presented. Just imagine being a progressive. You say you're for women's rights, and you're wearing the hijab in a devotion to a man who was a misogynist, a rapist, and a pedophile. And you think you are being somehow enlightened to wear that around your head when it was prescribed by the only man that I think could have rivaled Paul as being evil.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, a multiple-time rapist, a pedophile of the worst order, and a horrific misogynist. There's a reason that Muslims, women, are degraded worse than our Orthodox Jewish women. That's because of the nature of the Quran. Well, Kashab was graphically represented as the horizon, which is the Q, the sun rising or falling on the horizon. The teeth again, which is for words, and the last letter, the Bayeth, is a family home depicted with a single entrance from above. For Yisrael, this reveals that there would be a new day, which would lead them home. That's what these letters describe. You are the artist and have fallen in love. In fact, you've written a wonderful article that's available in the community section of Yada Yahowah on the nature of the letters. And here we have the sign of the dawning of a new day, of greater enlightenment, of teeth with words, and of home, which would lead home.
Yeah, you can even say a light shining on the words, is the way home.
Yeah, light
if
shining
you don't go
on the
there,
words.
where you going to find?
Right, which lead us home. For Yisrael's leaders, these would be the political leaders, that was the third group, religious leaders, the common people, and political leaders. Yahweh used azan. While pronounced differently, it is written identically in the ancient text ozen, which means ear. It depicts our ozen, faculty of hearing, as an azan tool or implement to deploy in azan, testing, proving, evaluating, and considering what we can azan hear if we incline our ears and open our minds to hear. Now, azan is scribed with the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet, which is also the first letter in Ab, Father, and El, God. It's the Aleph. It depicts a ram's head. A ram was symbolic of leadership and of leading the flock and of protecting the flock, even living with the flock. The second letter, the Z, is shown as a plow, which would till the ground to make it receptive for seeds to grow. The third letter is a nun, which is either a seed sprouting and growing to conceive something that is fruitful and new life, or, to me, like it's a sperm, which is the source of new life and giving birth to a child. So it's the leader of the flock, plowing the ground so that it is receptive to the seeds taking root and growing. And so in these characters, Yahweh has explained the role of those who seek to lead his people. If you're going to lead God's people, you need to listen. Right? You need to be a leader who plows the ground such that the weeds are moved aside and the ground is receptive to the seeds God is sowing and that you are sharing, taking root and growing. That's how to be a leader. Lead by example. What a lovely idea. How do you think that Dode became so articulate and wrote such magnificent Mizmor songs? How did he write the 119th Psalm, which has 8 statements about each of the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet in alphabetical order to describe how to maximize the time we spend observing the Torah? Do you think that he wrote that without having studied the Torah? Do you think he wrote these beautiful songs without having listened to God sing to him?
Impossible.
This must be a student before one teaches. One must be a listener before one talks. I've been doing this a long time. I didn't speak this vociferously, this boldly, this bluntly until I spent a very, very long time translating and studying and contemplating the words that God has shared with us. And I would tell you that the beauty of what we're sharing with you is that I'm not telling you anything that you cannot verify yourself. All of it. Dee, you, and also Kirk, you have looked at the words that Yahweh has conveyed through his prophets, presented from the oldest extant sources, and translated in an amplified manner where every pertinent meaning is presented and where the most form of the word is presented so that you can copy it and paste it to any search engine to go verify those translations. Everything that we're sharing with you is derived from what Yahweh has shared with us. We're not plowing new ground. We're not claiming that we have special insights that no one else has. Even when Yahweh says, I want you to understand this is the proper approach to this book, the book of Daniel or the book of Ezekiel. I'm not basing anything that I'm sharing with you off of a unique revelation that was only given to me. Well, God said, I want you to explain this to the people based upon what you're reading. I want you to translate everything in Ezekiel from beginning to end and explain it. It's all there. You can challenge everything that I have written. You can challenge every conclusion I have drawn, every insight I am sharing. All there for you, and it is all verified and all based upon what Yahweh's prophets have conveyed with us. And that's really why we're all here, why we're devoted, committed to awakening God's people, to enlarging the covenant family, to exposing lies, and to sharing the truth. We want God's people aware of who he is, what he is offering, what he expects in return. And we do what he does, which is we expose and condemn religion, because until you walk away from it, until you're like Abraham and on the road away from the birthplace of institutionalized religion and its integration into governance of Ur and Babylon, until you're leaving it and walking away, as Moshe had done from his position in Egypt, which is why he was tending sheep, until you have done what they have done. Look at Dod. He was out in Bethlehem. He was the only one of Yesse's sons that wasn't around the father in the metropolitan areas near where Shamuel was. He had to go fetch him. Until you've done that, God can't reach out to you. You can't know him. But once you've done it, that opportunity is available to you. So that is the reason why Yahweh spends so much time exposing and condemning religion, as he has done throughout the book of Hosea, probably the most comprehensive book from that perspective. So this is God's message to you. We want you to listen to him. We speak his words to you. Our commitment is to properly render what he has said in the most common language of the world, the language spoken by more Jews than any other, the language spoken by more people than any other, to translate the words that God's conveyed to us as accurately and as completely as possible from the oldest extant sources, and then to explain what God is saying and make it relevant to people today by making the necessary connections to go from knowing to understanding. That is our role, and hopefully you will capitalize upon it. We're 30 minutes past our normal allotted time. Thank you for sticking it out with me. Thank you for the your assessment of the universe. That's the way it is today. Thank you for interrupting as you're in the middle of it, and throw in what I thought was important for people to hear, because it's going to get rough out there, and there's only one way to opt out. Well, there's lots of ways to opt out. There's only one way to opt out.
one successful way.
Yes, only one successful way. Lots of bad ways. So we look forward to being with this time next week. Maybe we'll be a little bit less verbose and end the show closer to the 90 minutes. But we do know that the overwhelming percentage of those who listen to this podcast do so at their convenience. And we also know that our family gathers together with us. Many listen on the phone so that they can listen even past the time that we broadcast. And it is a chance for family to get together. And for those that want to do it, you're more than welcome. And we invite you to listen live and to join the chat room with those of our family who are eager to know the Word of our God and to share with one another, enjoying just what it means to be part of the covenant family. And for all, we encourage you to read, to go to Yada Yahowah, have an appreciation of what God has shared. If you're new to this, please start at the beginning with Volume 1 of An Introduction to God and read right through to the end. There's enough to keep you occupied and thinking for a very long time. I know my wife first wrote me after she had spent better part of 2 or 3 weeks reading day and night what was at that time probably 10% of what we have available today. And through it, she came to know Yahweh, and you will too. So may Yah bless. Thank you for listening. Happy Shabbat to one and all, and may you have a wonderful day tomorrow as you get to enjoy your time with our Heavenly Father, Yahweh. Good night, and may He bless.
Nice. Shabbat shalom, y'all.
Good night, my friend.